and I just don't need to do anything else. Okay. So welcome, welcome everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. The Senate is gathering for our Senate Democratic Caucus, and we are strong in red and pink. Wow, pretty amazing. Today we are going to be looking at a couple key provisions, the Budget Adjustment Act and our Omnibus Housing Bill. And we're also going to be looking at additional bills. I know we have a major labor bill that we're going to chat about, and I know other people have bills that they want to discuss. So I first would like to begin. One of our Valentines we have as a caucus is we have actually put out an ask to a new caucus director. I want to thank all of you who've been involved in the hiring process, Senator Sears and Senator Hardy for helping Senator Perchler to me and Jim Dandino hire Ziva Solomon is her name. And many of you met her at the Celebrate Senate Democrats event, and she is going to be coming on board. It's not fully clear when, but hopefully in the next week or so. And more, she will be able to introduce herself to you when she arrives. But it's exciting, and I have to say I'm thrilled. So it's terrific, and thank you all for your help on that. Yeah, it's terrific. So I'd like to begin, if we could, today with Senator Kitchell, who's going to walk us through some of the key provisions of the Budget Adjustment Act. Yeah, why don't you come down here so people can see you, or stand by this chair? Yeah, that would be great. They can see you and they can hear you. All right.
Well, we have not finished the budget adjustment process. We're still taking testimony, and we hope to wrap up by tomorrow afternoon. A couple of things that I was just probably late to you because you're probably getting emails, and that is the 9.2 million the House put in for organic dairy. The budget adjustment is really to be a technical budget to clean up actuals versus estimates and so forth. And so we are leaving it up to our Ag Committee to really flesh out if we're going to start a new program. The budget adjustment is not the vehicle that we feel comfortable that should be used. Our understanding was the House put the money in, they reserved it. At that point, had taken no testimony from the agency of Ag. So how you set up a new program, the parameters, the conditions clearly articulating the whole administrative process, etc., all is part of that work. So at this point, we feel that that is after by 2024, and I will bring up something else, and that is we can do appropriations that do not have to wait until July 1st. So if there's an issue and we want to take more time, and we decide in the end that that's something that we're going to fund, we can make it effective on that. So I just want to let you know, if you're getting emails that organic farms need help, we're getting a lot of emails from a whole lot of entities that say we need help or we want funding. But that has a benefit button. It just needs to be really vetted, and a $9 million appropriation during the testimony and no testimony from the entity that would have to administer is really, we're not comfortable moving forward in that way. So just to let you know that you may have got emails. The other thing that has hit the news, and that is the fact that some contaminated cannabis has hit the market. And the whole process of getting that legislation passed, there was a lot of, Senator Sears certainly was in the middle of that between the House and the Senate. The Senate version had tested, but the House pulled it out. We decided to move forward. We need to have a product that has quality, and then we have the assurances that it's not contaminated. So we have had the request of the Cannabis Control Board to set up testing. And there are limitations because you can't commingle cannabis testing with ag testing because of the federal requirement. To let you know that's something that came in after the House passed their BAA. And we feel, in light of that experience, really needs to be addressed. So there's money to acquire the equipment, the testing equipment. The budget adjustment has money to pay the private labs for the remainder of the fiscal year, and there'll be 3 positions of staff to lab. The other area that we are taking more testimony, and that is to try to understand all the different pieces of childcare. There's one section that got added. We know we have to do some with these act because the way in which the money was appropriated as a loan or comes or note, that's it's not working. That never got into the BAA house. And what they put in is $4,000 to people who have worked in childcare. It's in the loan repayment section, but it says if you don't qualify for a loan repayment, we'll give you a $4,000 payment retroactive. It's like, how does that fit with the retention and the $6 million we have there? So sometimes it's hard to sort it out, and I'm just saying that sometimes it takes a little longer to sort out in terms of what is there and how it's being spent. The other area that we still have to mark up, the judiciary came in and we're concurring with the House, but they also wanted to create their own network. So they have a request, I think, for about $7 million that would allow them to set up their own network, because apparently the one with ADS is going down and it's tying up all the hearings and so forth. So I'm back to my mantra of we just don't know in totality what 24 is going to have for areas that we need to address versus what's in the governor's proposed budget, which in some areas is really back to the basics, and housing is going to be one of those areas. So the one thing that we have here, which is going to be the topic of more discussion, and that has to do with what we're doing with housing. House had put in $50 million to go to VHCB. They also had extended the transitional housing for the most vulnerable through the end of the quarter. And then that's the recommendation that came out of House Human Services. And then I guess a member of appropriations said, well, we want to keep the door open for everybody. Now, we've had a lot of discussion in the Joint Fiscal Committee in terms of when the federal money ends, how we in fact start phasing down. And so we'll be taking more money, more testimony. But I want to assure you the issue is not the need to address vulnerable populations, which are going to be, obviously children under 18, people who have a disability, people who are seniors, etc. But right now, it's what we're getting is testimony, and that is if someone who is single and 25 years old and they come in first, and I think Senator Cummings had this example. If a family comes in at the end of the day, they're because there is a shortage. So the one thing is, it's not a matter of saying that there's capacity, we just don't want to fund it. There are not enough rooms. And so who gets in to stay in the car? In this case, it was a woman with a disability and 2 children because there are no rooms available. So to give you some idea of what we spent, and because this has been for people coming in new, or even for those of us who have been around, it is so hard to keep track of all that has been put in to sort of address the housing shortage. But today we have put in about $320 million toward housing. Now, under FEMA, we housed everybody. And between March of 20 and end of June of 22, we had spent $110 million on hotel rooms. We probably bought some of those hotels 3 times over. But what is happening now is not only the number of rooms being reduced, but the prices are being substantially increased. So for March of 20 through the end of June of 22, we spent 110. We have spent $54 million in 9 months of this fiscal year. So we anticipated in the budget, $15 million of general fund to help us get through the first and quarter. To do that with all the vulnerable, we have to add another about, I don't know, 11 to 13 million on top of, out of that 15 million, we had allocated 4.8 to go for transitional housing. So we looked at this, we looked at the phase down of the federal emergency rental assistance program in the joint fiscal committee and how that money would be apportioned out. And there is money that we are adding in the budget adjustment, and that's to get apartments brought up to code and get them online as quickly as possible. And looking at how it relates to the 24 budget. So I've been talking with the chair of economic development to make sure that the more you make decisions now, the more you are constricting the decisions that you can make. And so there's been some discussion, well, if you don't give 50 million to VHCB, isn't that terrible? Well, the question is not necessarily what goes to VHCB. The question is that funding stream, how does that fit with home ownership? There's another one helping missing middle with rental. There are other strategies that relate to housing. And so how does that all look like relative to what the government proposed in the 24 budget? So my only point is that it is where millions of dollars have gone. The House has added another study. We know that there's been study after study, and studies don't create housing immediately. What's going to create it is obviously the funding and some of the work maybe it's being done on regulations and so forth that might inhibit bringing more housing on more quickly. And I will also point out in the governor's 24 budget, VHCB is essentially level funded. It's not, it's about 28, 29 million. So we know that we need to do more. We're talking about how much we want to do in the BAA. It's like this year, the BAA, it's almost become the big bill in terms of what people are asking for. And obviously people like to have the certainty. I'd like to know I've got my $50 million, but if you lock in that $50 million here, then you don't have it to consider for any of the other, maybe other options for housing or for any of the other competing priorities that might, that will be on our list. So we're going to be taking more testimonies if we can sort out, what we're doing for childcare. We know we need to make some tweaks there. And if the cost of keeping open the cold weather exemption through the end of June is $7 million. And you're probably hearing, we don't want anybody to go without a roof over their head. Well, under our current system, with not enough rooms, people are in fact going with it. And so we're struggling with, do you set that priority, define the vulnerables, and if you had $7 million, do you want to spend it on a motel room, or do you want to spend it to advance the development of more ongoing housing or emergency shelters? We understand motels are available for sale for conversion to more emergency housing so that we're not relying on motel rooms, which if you talk to housing people, it's not good. I mean, everybody's been working with families to know in a small room and you've got children and you've got a concentration of individuals who are under a great deal of stress. It's not at all a desirable plan. And the irony is that the House a couple of years ago wanted to get rid of it. So now we're sort of in a different position of when do you want to shut that program down and how you want to allocate one-time money and if you want to do it. But I will tell you our thinking is first and foremost, we need to make sure we're protecting the vulnerable. We don't want to have a mother and two kids be the one ending up in the car. And so, and do you want to use $7 million to purchase more motel rooms, or would you prefer to invest it in property acquisition or whatever? So once again, that's kind of the life of your appropriations committee, is to weigh it out But I'm sure you're getting emails in terms of, what people want, and that's what they're looking at from their perspective. And I think that's kind of highlights this tremendous amount of technical changes. The reach up caseload is much higher. That's like about a $7 million increase because more families are coming on than were estimated. Let me assure you, nothing is being reduced in the budget adjustment in terms of the childcare. The caseload was estimated to be too high. So the appropriation to support the benefit need is being adjusted. We're moving some money, one-time money, to create for the getting that temporary facility for detention and for kids in state custody, and that will be put into the one-time section, the one-time kind of capital, frankly. So budget adjustment is, to a large extent, a lot of just moving money around, but those are the key areas that we're either adding or adapting, or perhaps we're not agreeing with the House. And I think obviously the organic farmers could just not ever, it's not a matter of not ever. It might be in the end of this budget process, but not now. We need more time to do that. The question is what we do with housing, how much we want to lock in now. We know that there are more families eligible for the missing middle home ownership. And so that's something that may couple with what we do for BHCB, and certainly maybe putting priority on making sure that if there is something we can do to move forward that emergency housing capacity, that's a priority as well. So I would say that it kind of covers the work that we've been doing. Andy, anything that I might have?
What's the total size of the BAA?
Oh, I know. I haven't looked at the final yet.
It's like 300. It's huge, right?
Yeah, probably, because a lot of it is healthcare, because the Medicaid assumptions were made that we were going to be doing redetermination. And we haven't done redetermination since the public health emergency was declared and we got the higher Medicaid match. So no one has exited the Medicaid rolls. And the assumption was that we would be starting up. So a big chunk of money has gone into the fact that that caseload has stayed higher because no redeterminations. And the other part is utilization is up. So Medicaid is big, and that's, I don't know, 80, 90 billion, something in that vicinity. So that's an example of where an assumption was made that we would be doing redeterminations and cleaning those eligibility rolls, and it didn't occur. So that's probably one of the biggest areas of adjustment that we've got in the year.
Any questions? Senator,
yeah. Thank you, Senator Kitchell. Just a clarification. I know you said this twice, but I now that Senator Starr's in the room, the organic dairy, as you guessed, I have a ton of them in my district, Senator Gray and I do. So I've heard from a lot of them. I want to know what to tell them. Are you taking up a bill? What can I expect to, what should I expect?
Well, you could use two different vehicles. You could have a bill that really fleshes it out and comes from the appropriation, or you can have a recommendation for funding that would come in the big bill.
Regular budget. Is that, can you say more about your?
Yeah, the organic guys, they're in bad straits, but you can't take what we were given and just do it, because we were just given a line item to hold 9.2 million with no framework whatsoever. So we got a crew together that's gonna look into trying to figure out where the problem is, because if you sell milk for $10 a gallon, which organic sells for, there's 10 gallons in 100 gallons. So there's some money missing somewheres along the way. So besides just throwing money at it, we should figure out who's getting the money and why isn't some of that getting back to the farmers the right amount.
It's a
So,
classic dairy problem.
oh, yeah.
So you're gonna take it up in ag and maybe do a
And
committee.
hopefully we'll do it in the big bill, but hopefully it'll pass, become active upon passage. So we may not have to wait until July 1.
And
We
if you
can,
even look in the BAA, they recognize that you had to set up a program and they're putting a fence around it. And we're like saying, that isn't really what we should be doing in the BAA, using that vehicle. But we need to have that discussion, we need to flesh it out, we need to be able to define what the issues are, how the money would be used, what would be the goal, and that wasn't done. So we felt that it's not, the BAA wasn't the vehicle to use for something that was of such complexity and really warranted that kind of testimony and problem definition.
Okay,
So
so
we have,
I just wanted clarity so I know what to
so
tell.
we are asking our ag committee to really take the time to give the testimony, help determine that expenditure. 9 million, once again, is, where those 9 million add up to, and should it be 9 million, should it be 7, should it be 10? I have no idea. If ultimately the decision is that we would use the open funding for that purpose.
Yeah, just all of us are hearing about the urgency of this, so it's very, all those studies. Question for you, Jane, about the the community action agencies. Are they coming with a plan for you on the motel money and how to transition? I mean, I understood that there may be a plan that they were going to be presenting. Is that for the big bill or is that for this, for the 21 million?
There is language about a study, but
Oh,
the
that's
agency,
the language.
but the agency is apoplectic for very good reason, because they have done about 12 studies. And they have brought together the stakeholders, and the secretary chaired the initiative. And it's sort of like, the studies have been done, but there are times when you just have to make a tough decision, and there's a natural desire to, well, let's study it, maybe there's some elusive magical
Sorry, I
solution here.
thought they'd been charged with coming with a plan. So
Well, that's sort of it, but we've already had that assignment. What we're trying to do is, within the available money, how you want to make those housing investments in a variety of ways. And that's what economic development's been spending time on. And how does that fit? And and how does it also fit with the fact that last year we had reduced the not withstood amount of the transfer to VHC by $10 million. The governor's budget took that $10 million amount out and substituted one-time money. So we were thinking we were making progress toward the goal of eliminating that notwithstanding, and scooping money for the general fund. So that's just, so the interplay between decisions in 24 and resources are just so important to understand it in total. And so that's why if we appear reluctant or unfeeling, it's maybe more of wanting to make sure that we're looking at everything in a total way. And sometimes with more information, you say, gee, that wouldn't have been where I put my first dollar. I would have done it, here or there. So that's your challenge that we're.
And your hope is to vote this out this week?
Wednesday.
Right.
Our hope springs eternal,
Right.
I'm told.
Thank you. If anybody
On
has more,
Valentine's Day, right?
hope on Valentine's Day is a good thing. Lots of us live in hope. Thank you, Senator Kitchell. And if anybody has more to chat about with Senator Kitchell or anybody else on the Appropriations Committee, please do. I know we have some follow-up that we're doing First, before we go to housing, I want to thank Senator Hardy for her fabulous Valentine's snacks, which are on the back table by Senator Starr, who's positioning himself close to these hearts. They are delicious and everybody is welcome to them. So please indulge yourself. So we're going to pivot because Jane set it up very nicely. Invitation to Senator Ron Hinsdale, who's going to give us an overview of the housing and where we're beginning to land on our housing bill.
Yes, we really appreciate the dialogue with Senate Appropriations, and Senator Kitchell's absolutely right. We can put a lot of money into housing, but if we're not reducing red tape and we're not truncating the timeline of when and how we get housing developed, we're spending a lot of money without helping to house people. And that's what you have heard is the majority of this bill. You may have gotten emails. I'll try to walk through some of the pieces of it. But even just today, we had Judge Zone in from the environmental court. And as he was talking about their desire for one more judge in environmental court, we were talking about him borrowing other judges from the other parts of the bench. I said something, maybe thoughtlessly about, well, yeah, we don't want to take people from other parts of the bench for environmental court. And he said, you're right, but if people don't have housing, they get stuck in other parts of the court. And we're highly aware of that in the entire judicial system. If someone has to stay in jail or can't see their kids because they don't have housing, that also matters to us in the environmental court. So yet, I cannot tell you how many people we've talked to from around the state where everything keeps coming back to housing. And, I'm really proud of our committee. We've heard from towns from every county, it feels like. I could probably make sure of that, but we have heard from people at every phase of when and how housing gets developed. And we're developing a bill that I think, digs into a lot of the pieces that have created huge bottlenecks that have lended themselves to this housing crisis. The bill is now called an act relating to housing opportunities made for everyone. It is the home bill. Allison wanted to take out the M and just do housing opportunities for everyone, and I'll let you use your imaginations as to how you're going to do that.
So that's just the way we pronounce it. It's not how it's spelled.
The piece that probably has gotten the most press because it was the most fully baked before session, though we have made changes to iron out concerns, is around local zoning. And, as I tried to say when I talked to the press, this isn't about local versus state. This is about local in relation to what homeowners want to be able to do to have flexibility to stay in place. The main centerpiece of this part of the bill that in my mind is duplexing by right. Wherever you have the same dimensions as a single family home, you will now be able to create a duplex. That is, Maine came in and said they had this huge housing bill, and that's like all they were able to do. And, so we feel pretty good about the other pieces of this bill too, but that is a heavy lift, and we're asking you to make that lift with us. We then have a little bit of an extension. If you have municipal water and sewer, that you can't prohibit a triplex or a quadruplex from being built. So you can't say we only want single family homes in this area. We don't want to look at a 4-unit townhome design, something like that. And all of that is within the context of density of 5 dwelling units per acre. As that has to be the threshold per acre, with several caveats, because that is probably what we've heard the most about is concerns that, everywhere we have municipal water and sewer now, there's going to be sprawl or there's going to be sort of endless development all along those pathways. And the planners, many planners, particularly Catherine Dimitrick from BAPTA, have helped us really clarify. We don't mean the line that went all the way out to the mobile home park or the industrial park and having to develop all along that corridor. We don't mean critical habitat and wetland areas. We don't mean you can't trade density in some places for other places. But we do mean that you have to increase density. I'm not, say that 1 house per 10 acres, 1 house per 5 acres is the standard. Where you have municipal water and sewer, which is a huge public investment from state and federal government. You are essentially sitting on gold. And some of many of your towns would like to have municipal water and sewer because that does allow you a really different capacity and flexibility than when you're sitting on septic. Another piece of this, we don't want to leave homelessness out of the conversation. You've heard we've had the highest rate of increase in homelessness in the country per capita, and yet compassionately, we have been housing 98% of people who are otherwise unsheltered, and we have to develop a transition plan away from that. We have a piece of the bill that makes it so that towns cannot prohibit the functional use of a shelter by messing with their hours and their seasonality. So they can't say you can only be open 4 hours a day, or we're not going to allow you to be open, for a particular cold season, whatever the case may be. That kind of pushes shelters further away where they're zoned in a way that they can't be functional. What else? Parking is in this bill. You might be hearing about parking. And the current proposal is that you cannot require more than one parking spot per dwelling unit. That includes a parking spot required for an ADU, for a duplex, 2 parking spots would be required, that kind of thing. We're looking at a compromise between 1 and 1.5 parking spots. You can round up, just so everybody knows. We're not asking for little European cars or whatever. But we're looking at how that would work to try and move us more towards having actual reasonable transportation plans in communities, but recognizing that some flexibility is needed there. Is there anything else in so you can still, this has come up, and this again gets to the heart of discrimination, de jure in housing. You can still be heard on the character of an area, but just once. If the community decides that it does meet the character of the area, you can't then appeal that decision arguing about whether or not you, 1 to 10 people in the community, believe that this does or does not fit the character of the area. That is another thing. You have lots of opportunities to appeal municipal decisions if you're an adjoiner and a butter, etc. You not want 10 people total from combination of voters and residents in the area can simply decide to appeal something. So you will see us try to stop all of the appeals that are possible in some way, not fully, but just start to narrow down, and create more predictability and a better timeline for people when they know who can appeal and what they can appeal for.
Revolving loan fund, the rental.
Yeah, I was going to get to Act 250 since it's the next section of the bill, and also similar vein, and then talk about some funding. So we do touch on Act 250 in the bill. Touch on is maybe not the right phrase, but we try to limit our scope to housing, and we have heard a lot about the caps on housing that relate to the population of an area we've designated for growth. And we have a proposal to lift population cap-based measures on priority housing projects, which means they have some affordable housing in village centers, designated neighborhood areas, and downtowns. We also change a 20 by 10 by 5 by 5 rule. I'm giving away our change. You can only build 10 units outside of those growth areas. Right now, you can only build 10 units within a 5-mile radius within 5 years. Many people have come in and said that actually creates a lot of sprawl. It creates a lot of, I have to go 5 miles away and build housing when I wanted to add a few more units to the same project or nearby. So we have lifted that threshold to, in some places, to 20 units, period. If you're in a growth area, you are at 20 units, no 5 by 5, and in some other areas, it's 20 by 5 by 5. Does that make sense? We have funding priorities that we care about. We know that this is a conversation with Senate appropriations, and we're putting these out there as to begin that conversation. Some of them are big, and many of them are shared priorities with the governor. I don't think you've heard a lot of disagreement that we've done a pretty good job on affordable housing, and we will continue to with investments in BHCB. That's perpetually affordable. But we also need to develop missing middle housing. We need affordable has often meant perpetual to us, which means pretty low income folks. And we need that to also start meaning affordable for everyone, that everyone, even at 150%, 180% of area median income our workforce can afford to buy housing. So some of that, and we are having a conversation about how immediate that is a backlog of home ownership projects. So people building with the idea that the money would subsidize the cost of that so they could have home ownership opportunities at an affordable rate for the workforce. The other piece that's huge and a priority of the governor is a rental revolving loan fund. And we've heard from a lot of employers that that would help them. And most employers, as you know, need to help solve the housing crisis, don't want to be landlords, but want to help pitch in, invest in a revolving loan fund that creates more transition. When I say transition, I mean so people can move here and stay somewhere for a little while and not have to leave and take a job somewhere else, but some kind of short to medium term rental housing that helps them land here, stay here, figure out how they can get into the conveyor belt of homeownership. We have lots of little pieces of funding that are just helping us try to change the conversation that, of course, we talk about with Senator Kitchell and appropriations, such as adding more money for home sharing programs and the kind of Vermont-based solutions that are really, valuable to folks. I will say most of this, especially the zoning pieces, don't take effect for 2 years. That we hope this spurs some change and gets people thinking about what is possible, but that is a current compromise that we may revisit that tried to give our communities time to change their bylaws, which there's money in here to change their bylaws as well. But I hope if and when this bill passes, it is my other baby. We signal to communities that, this time of constant appeals and really regulating what someone can do to reduce density and only allow single family zoning that time is coming to an end. That is a lot of the bill. That's the home bill.
And it's the home bill. And questions, Dick, Senator McCoy.
When you talk about limiting appeals, you're talking about
Municipal to
ordinance,
the
not-
environmental division.
On the Act 250, the 5x5, you had said that you can't build more densely than that.
Right now.
There's no, unless I misunderstand, I don't think there's a rule that you can't. What happens?
Oh, you hit Act 250.
If you do that, you come
Thank
under
you.
jurisdiction.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We have heard functionally from a lot of small builders that they stay under that. I mean, they go up to 9 and then they look at another community because, and we talked to Judge Sone about this. We don't want to have, a whole area of our judicial system where people just try to avoid it, and that's what we're hearing from every corner. These caps, right? That doesn't mean you can't build more. It means you hit Act 250 and you might be adding 2 or more years to your project. And time is money. Time means that you're not building housing for a population that needs it right now. So we are hearing over and over again that functionally people are not treating those as a threshold by which I then enter into Act 250, but a cap at which I can't enter into another 2 years after I've done the municipal piece of duplicative processes at the state level. And so they are choosing not to build dense housing where we have decided that we should not.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you. It sounds like this bill is mostly regulatory and stuff. So is there another housing bill vehicle? And I ask because, and maybe it's the budget, but I asked because I had a conversation yesterday with Commissioner of Health, Mark Levine, about recovery housing, which is a huge need in many of our communities. And it's more supportive housing. Right. And is there another housing bill that would include things like that?
So this is a large germane vehicle for a lot of conversations. I think what restricted us most was time in committee. We're bumping up against that now because we'd like to have the bill mostly finalized this week. My understanding was that the House was looking at landlord-tenant issues, recovery housing, things like that, and they have potentially 1 or 2 vehicles over there.
Okay.
And we would cross-pollinate our bills at some point. It's not something I'm ignoring, but that's like a week's worth of testimony to untangle that.
Yeah, it's in the context of the opioid settlement rights, which I'm on that committee and we're to make recommendations. So I just wanted either in the budget or in this bill, put a bookmark for that, because it's a huge need and there's potential.
There's also a House bill around zoning recovery houses.
Yeah, okay, so
You wanna
maybe
take a look
maybe
at
that's
that.
where it's gonna go.
But I think the House is addressing supportive and recovery housing. So I think we'll be getting their work. I think their work on that.
We also have a rental risk mitigation fund in here, which is something we've heard most support from the governor's office and Vermont Legal Aid. They want to direct the rental risk mitigation to non-payment of rent, eviction proceedings. But the idea overall is that if you are, for some reason, deemed hard to house, you're coming out of incarceration or you're coming out of recovery, you might face a situation where even the limited housing we have is closed off to you. And this would be kind of an insurance policy that there are resources available to pick up the tab if someone tries to take a chance on someone and gets burned. So we start to just talk about how to house more people coming out of recovery. But I know exactly what you mean with recovery housing, and I hope it shows up somewhere. We can always consider it when we get the House bill if it's not there, but it's testimony because
I just want people to remember it.
We just need to wrap up in a sec. I'm gonna go to Senator Lyons and then we need to wrap. So.
Right, so I think the issue that's been brought up by Senator Hardy and Senator Kitchell is really very important. Remembering that a couple of years ago, we asked VHCB to direct some of their funds toward step-down beds for mental health and others. So there are a lot of needs within that human services category. But we can't forget that when we're not just talking about housing, we are also talking about services that are so critical that need to be embedded in the housing. So it does make sense to look at the bill that's coming over from the House and then to have our committee look at it and have appropriations look at it. It's a very large, but very critically important.
And the other thing I would point out is remembering that housing assistance and those support services, we are budgeting those federal dollars
Right.
for the next 3 years.
Right.
So that's why it's so hard to remember what's out there, what's in the pipeline, what have we already done, how have we allocated it out into the future. So that's another important thing is
So
how we already started to address that concern.
Senator Bray.
Yeah, really quickly. So thanks for all the work, and we look forward to seeing the housing bill when it gets referred over to natural. I do feel like I have to speak up a little bit for Act 250. It has been a crucial investment and over 50 years to help us shape development, and it often just gets represented as a burden. So we will be open-minded about it, but I think there are many parties who just the universal request is exemption, because it's always easier to operate unregulated. When we first talked about this 6 weeks ago in here, I think I said good planning is good planning. So I think we're coming to the table in good faith with that same mentality of getting something done and supporting good planning. But there's a housing crisis nationally, and only Vermont has Act 250. So sometimes Act 250 gets represented as the major stumbling block, and I think there's many other challenges. So just say that. And
Right. I know, thank you. I know that there are a number of bills. I think we're gonna have to do them informally because it is after 1 o'clock. So thank you all. And I appreciate our presenters' terrific job. Thank you both. Okay,
Thank you.
Thomas. Thomas. Right, and-
Yeah, Mark. This is awareness.